News Talk 820 WBAP. It's now on FM at 93.3. My name is Jeff. It's Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok. Chris is off this week. I'll be filling in. In about 3 minutes, I'll be talking a little bit about the state of the state when it comes to politics in our country. Stick around for that because I think it's something that, I offer common sense opinion. And I think that you'll sit back and go, yeah, you're saying exactly how I'm feeling, Jeff. That's coming up in 3 minutes. But first, we're about 3 weeks away from March Madness, 4 weeks away from March Madness. And whether you follow college basketball or not, let me ask you a question. When I say college basketball, and for those of you that are avid fans of college basketball, the easier answer to the question than someone who doesn't. And for those of you that casually follow college basketball, you still may know an answer to this. And those that pay no attention to it, you still may know an answer. Who is the biggest name in college basketball today? Who is it? The biggest name in college basketball today, this season, across this country. Who is it? We're only 3 weeks away from March Madness. See, I contend college basketball has a significant problem, a real major problem. And it comes down to the question I just asked you. 10 years ago, if I asked that question, you could have reeled off 4, 5, 6 names that were big names in college basketball. Now, if you're an avid UT fan, if you're an avid Baylor fan, if you're an avid fan of college basketball, Houston fan, you might know a player or two. I contend the biggest name in college basketball today is Caitlin Clark. She is the biggest name in college basketball, men's or women's. She's a player for University of Iowa. She broke all-time scoring record just this week against Michigan. Caitlin Clark is a star at the University of Iowa. And we've seen that with how Iowa basketball ratings, some of the ratings, TV ratings for Iowa basketball games have been bigger than the NBA games. That proves my point. She's the biggest star in college basketball today. Bigger than any male college athlete, bigger than any other female college athlete. The biggest name in college basketball today is Caitlin Clark. Why? Well, first of all, she's lovable. She's likable. She has fun. She enjoys it. Her persona on the air, her persona on the court. She just seems like a fun-loving person who loves the craft of basketball. But it also comes back to the fact that Caitlin Clark is a fourth-year senior. And that comes back to what I contend is the biggest problem in college basketball today. One and done. It's a revolving door. So as we move closer to March Madness, I contend March Madness as we once know it is going to have a problem because you won't know any of the athletes. You see, we as sports fans, we fall in love with the athlete. We fall in love with the program, and the program's represented by the athlete. And when we don't know the athlete, we have less affection, less attention, less likeliness to watch, follow, and be a participant of a specific sport. College football we can follow because usually college football players stick around for 3 years, sometimes 2 years, many of them 4 years. There's a reason why University of Michigan won the national title this year in football, because they were the most veteran team in college football, one of. College basketball's got a real problem. We'll continue talking about that later, but first I want to move on to another story. By the way, if you want to weigh in on any of these topics, 800-288-9227, 800-288-WBAP is the number. My name is Jeff. It's Westside Jeff, and for Chris Krok, you can also hit me up across social media at Westside Jeff. So I have a theory on things. I mentioned a moment ago I'd talk a little bit about politics. Every day, one of our top stories in the news is something to do with politics. Every day. You can pick up your newspaper. You can turn on this radio station. You can turn on any television news broadcast here in Dallas, any national newscast on Fox or CNN, MSNBC. Pick any news network you want. And one of the lead stories any time of the day is always something going on politically. And it comes down to two names, Trump and Biden. Every day it's in the news, and it's something to do with Donald Trump and his quest for his second term as the president of the United States. And it also comes down to Joe Biden and his attempt to keep the title of president of the United States. Now, my belief is this. The overwhelming majority of Americans, I'm talking 90-some%, overwhelmingly majority of Americans are politically exhausted. They're politically exhausted. They're like, enough. I'm tired. I don't want to hear you anymore. I don't want to talk politics. That's the majority of America. Yeah, there's a few small percentage, a very, very small percentage of people who can't get enough of political fodder. But it's a very, very small number. Now, there's even a smaller number of folks who will stay engaged with that 24/7. They just engage the whole time. That's the reality of the country we live in today. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. People are politically exhausted. One of the things I like doing is I like going out to restaurants and sitting in a restaurant with friends or buddies or whatever. And to me, this is what great talk show hosts do. I just sit there and listen to other people talk. I love going into big restaurants and sitting close enough to other tables just to hear them talk. And pretty consistently, it's hard to hear people talking about politics unless you're sitting next to that very, very, very small percentage few who are politically engaged and can't get enough of it. They're talking about anything but politics. And when politics comes up, it's typically, man, I don't want to talk about that. This is a release for me. Lunch with buddies, with friends, with whatever it is. I don't want to talk about politics. I want to enjoy life. I don't want to enjoy that. Political fodder has created an era of political exhaustion across our country. Now, there's an old fable I learned as a little boy. And that was the fable of the little boy who cried wolf. And he cried wolf so much that no one listened to him anymore. And the townspeople tuned him out. So as we're talking political exhaustion, I got to ask you a question. Might we be cruising into that area right now? Are we into a scenario, and might we be headed to a scenario where the little boy cried wolf and nobody's listening to him? And the topic is about politics. I want to keep talking about that coming up in about 4 minutes. I want to ask you your opinion on this. Do you think we might be headed towards a fable like that? I'd love to hear your opinion. Hit me up across social media at Westside Jeff or at 800-288-9227. That's 800-288-WBAP. I'll explain what I'm talking about in 4 minutes. My name's Jeff. It's Westside Jeff and for Chris Krok on News Talk 820 WBAP and now on FM at 93.3. Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok tonight and the rest of the week here on News Talk 820 WBAP and now on FM at 93.3. Chris is taking the week off. I get a chance to sit here and give you common sense opinion on current events. Excuse me for clearing my throat on you. We're talking about we talked earlier about the shooting in the school in Mesquite, which is interesting. I still find that story interesting. I talked a little bit about college basketball has a real problem today, and we're a couple weeks out front of March Madness. I think it could change what goes on in March Madness, what's going on in college basketball. NIL and that whole thing has ruined it. But I'm also talking right now about politics and what's going on in the world of politics. If you want to weigh in, 800-288-9227. That's 800-288-WBAP. like Cecil. Cecil, you're on News Talk 820 WBAP and FM 93.3. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, thank you, Clark. I'm doing a great job. I was wanting to talk about, I saw on the news where in New York City they made like a total, complete raid on each of the 5 boroughs. They went after the slumlords. They had a school bus that they had to get one of those migrant school buses to haul them all in. And what it boils down to is they have been taking kickbacks for years, they said, from the contractors that go in and do the jobs that the government pays for the low income. Okay, now, with that said, all right, you know who controls the building and the permits, so to speak, in New York City? It's the syndicate, the mob, the crime families, like Sammy the Bull. That was his deal. He was in construction. That was where he made his money for, the boss. Okay. Now my question is, they got the landlords for taking kickbacks from the builders and the contractors who are owned hook, line, and sinker by the mob. My question is, do you think that they will get them into the room and say, let's talk, let's cut some deals, and let's get some of these mobsters that are making this happen, because they're the one that this, ultimately the money trickles down to, or up, however you want to look at it. And if that's to be the case, I wonder if you might see some of these landlords, the ones they think might talk, they might, as they say, disappear.
Cecil, thanks for listening and thanks for calling. I appreciate you weighing in and calling the show tonight. Thank you very much. To answer your question, I'm not totally up to speed on this. It's a bigger story than just a quick mention. But to your point about the mob connections and real estate, and listen, a long time ago, I had a talk show guy that I worked with for years that said, Jeff, if you want to know what's behind a story, all you got to do is follow the money. So to your point, Cecil, thank you again for calling and being part of the show. My answer to you is follow the money. Politics comes into play. Political policy comes into play. And it gets back to what I'm talking about. And that is, I think people today are politically exhausted. Let me explain. When you go out and about, one of the things that more than ever before that you're not talking about in business meetings and social meetings is politics. And that's, I think, because you're politically exhausted. My belief is that overwhelmingly the majority of Americans are politically exhausted today. And as we get into a presidential election this year, it's only going to get worse, because every day the top news story across your media, your social media feed, the top news story on any newspaper across the country, the top story in national news, no matter what network it is, one of the top 2 or 3 stories always comes back to Trump or Biden. Now, I have a theory on this, and that is the old fable of a little boy who cried wolf too many times. You know, the little boy goes out on the range, he comes back and says, wolf, wolf, wolf. Everybody stops everything and goes out and tries to find the wolf. And he does that for attention. It's attention seeking. But one day he goes out and there's sheep out on the herd, out on the land, and there really is a wolf. There really is. He sees it. It's going after the sheep. He runs back and cries, wolf, 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 but nobody comes out and looks at him. Nobody. It's because he cried wolf too many times. So what happened is he became white noise. He became invisible because people stopped paying attention to him. So I wonder if we are in an era where the fable of where the little boy cried wolf, that we're starting to see that in the world of politics. You see, every hour of every day, there's a news story involving something around Trump and Biden. Donald Trump is a political piñata to Democratic Party or Democrats in power. He's a political piñata. They're swinging at him. They're nailing him. They're hitting on him. They're beating on him. They're trying to bust him loose with an agenda. More charges, more indictments, more investigations. Much of it is political persecution. Some of it Trump did to himself over the years. But at the end of the day, it's political persecution. Donald Trump is the human political piñata of the Democratic Party. On the other hand, the other big story going on is Joe Biden. Joe Biden continues to get exposed and beaten on about his age. Now, for me, it's not an age thing. Hear me out on this. To me, it's not about age with Joe Biden. For Joe Biden, it is his age specifically because it's his mental acuity. To me, it's all about mental acuity. He clearly does not have the mental acuity to handle the office of the president, period. It's not an age thing. It's the mental acuity. Listen, I got a buddy named Earl. Earl is just turned 60 years old. He's my golfing buddy. We're golfing partners. We played golf for 20 years. Earl's divorced, has a child, Nick, who is 30 years old, and Earl has no kids other than Nick. I mean, that's it. Earl has been afflicted with dementia, has officially been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and about 2 years ago, at the age of 50, almost 58, was moved into a into a nursing home with, it's assisted living and memory care. And at the time, he's only 57, going to be 58. That's not an age thing to me. It's a mental acuity. He didn't have the mental acuity to handle the office of the presidency. I'll continue that conversation in a matter of minutes on the bottom of the hour. But first, coming up in a matter of minutes is story in the newsroom. My buddy Sean Allen in the newsroom has a story about the crisis going on at the southern border and what Texas is doing with that. But he also has a story about unionized workers on strike at a Fort Worth brewery. So that's coming up in about 3 minutes or 4 minutes. On the other side of that newscast with Sean Allen in the newsroom, I'll continue the conversation about my belief in political exhaustion, how it's going to play out this year, how it impacts you, how it impacts me, and how it's going to impact potentially the election. A little bit of it's scary, but you got to stick around to hear about it because it's just my opinion. Story is Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok. I'm on News Talk 820 WBAP and now FM at 93.3. So Jeff is the name. It's Westside Jeff. You can interact with me across social media like many have tonight. At Westside Jeff on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. Or you can pick up the phone dial 800-288-9227. That's 800-288-WBAP. I have a theory, which is what I'm talking about, that every day we see stories, top of the hour, one of the top stories in the news is something to do with Trump and his quest for his second term as president, or Joe Biden, which has to do with him keeping the title and trying to win a second term as president every day. And I just contend people are politically exhausted for a bunch of reasons. And the old fable, a little boy cried wolf, I think is coming into play. If you got opinion, 800-288-9227. Like Gary from Stephenville. Gary's calling in. Gary, you're on News Talk 820 WBAP and FM 93.3.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thanks for calling.
All right. I don't think anybody is really politically exhausted. I think they're exhausted of the fact that we have political inaction. We have a lopsided DOJ where a Democrat can do whatever they want, but if you're a Trump supporter, you cross the street wrong, you're going to get arrested. If you're a Clinton, you can destroy evidence and delete 33,000 emails, even though that's a felony, nothing's going to happen to you. If you're Hunter Biden, you can ignore a congressional subpoena, but if you're a Trump supporter and you ignore it, you get arrested for it. And when I say the political inaction, for example, everybody says that Biden doesn't have the power to shut the border. Well, 3 days into his office presidency, he sure enough had enough power to open it up with the stroke of a pen. Now everybody wants to blame Republicans, saying, hey, you know what? They didn't pass this new border bill. Well, we don't need a new border bill. We already have the border laws on the books. All you have to do is enforce them. But nobody's being held to account for corruption and all this other stuff that we have going on. And that's what people are tired of. We have a lying media that can't tell the truth one day to the next. So, and I guess what's got me the most upset about it is I'm really disappointed in the American people, because nothing is going to change until we, the people, do something about it and change it ourselves. Our government does no longer act on our behalf. But Americans seem to be okay as long as they get to drink their Bud Light, watch their NFL football, and complain on social media, then they've done their duty for the day. They're waiting for some Q fair here for Trump to come back in office and save them. And I'm telling you, Trump's not going to get reelected. The reason there's no other Democrat up there on stage against Biden is because the fix is already in for 24, and he is going to be reinstalled again. That's my opinion.
Gary, pretty strong opinion. I can't disagree with you, man. Thanks for listening and thanks for calling. I can't tear apart a whole lot of what you said. Thank you very much for being a part of the show. I would disagree with you on one thing. I really do think people are politically exhausted, and that's why the voting electorate is not voting. I think it's all tied together. I think people are politically exhausted. I agree with you that people are, let's see, I wrote it down what you said, tried to write as quickly as I could there, that you said people aren't politically exhausted, rather exhausted on political inaction. I agree with political inaction, but our government, unfortunately, is kind of set up like that. As politicos in my life say to me, oh, good, we have a Democrat in the president's office, a Republican led House, and a Democratic-led Senate, so nothing will get done. That's how our system is set up. But you talk about political accountability. I agree with that. So thank you for calling, and thank you for being a part of the show, Gary. But I do believe that people are politically exhausted. And the example of that is, go out the next time you're out to lunch or out to dinner in a place that you can hear others around you. See how often the conversation of politics comes up. I think people are politically exhausted. And I think that little fable about the boy that cries wolf comes into play. And I think it's a dangerous thing because it gets our eye off the ball. And I think that's when we have improprieties. It doesn't help our cause. So I wonder if that fable of the little boy who cried wolf and created white noise and nobody responded to him because he told enough lies about it, nobody responded. I wonder if that's happening to us right now. Yes, Trump is a political piñata to the Democrats. That's the best way I can explain it. He's a political piñata. The Democrats are trying to beat on him, beat down on him. So let me ask you a weird question. I'm a politico to some degree. I could talk politics for hours and hours and hours upon end, but I think, again, political talk only on talk radio can kind of get quite boring because I just don't think people want to talk about that. But bear with me for a second. What if, you got to ask yourself, Gary, to your question about them beating on Trump all the time, what if beating on Trump works? Is it possible that all the negative work that the Democrats and the left-wing media, national reporting media that's protecting Joe Biden, what if what they're doing actually works? We won't know that for another 10, 11 months. Is it possible that it might work? Am I missing something? Are we missing something on that? You see, Joe Biden is old, and there's not a person alive that can't look at the man and say the guy doesn't have the mental acuity. He doesn't know where he is half the time. Just look at him walking. He scoots. He doesn't walk. He scoots. It's embarrassing. So Joe Biden continues to get on the right, at least in the world of Fox News. They beat on him for not being awake and alert and there. But for me, it's not just about age. Again, I got a buddy named Earl, 57, 58 years old, was diagnosed with dementia and then ended up Alzheimer's, and they had to put him in a home. So I don't want to put an age on the presidency because I know some 60-year-olds that could not serve as president. Hell, I know some 40-year-olds I wouldn't trust in the office of president. I know a guy that I'm a swim dad. My kids were swimmers. I know when my kids were swimming in high school, There's a fellow swim dad at the age of 45 was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and he died 4 years later. That's not an age thing. That's a mental acuity thing. On the other hand, I know folks who are 70 who have tremendous mental acuity. To me, that's what it's about. But the national reporting media continue to protect Joe Biden. They rarely report on or emphasize or really show video of Joe's moments of dementia-like. And that's what pisses us off. To your point about the earlier we took call about the multiple tiered, two-tiered system of justice. We talk about, the national media protecting Joe. Hell yes, that's going on. But what if it works? Might it work? I think that when it comes to politics, I think people are politically exhausted. They want to get past that. And another example of that is, remember who elects. Remember the final candidates who are on the ballot in November, where they come from. They come from the primary. And the primary elections come up here in the state in just a couple weeks. We have a couple Super Tuesdays coming up. And that's who we, as the voters, put up to run eventually as the Republican nominee and the Democratic nominee. Do you know, I want to ask you the question, and I'll give you the answer on either side of this. Do you know what percentage of the American electorate vote in a primary? What would you guess? Think about it for a minute and ask yourself, what percentage of people who are eligible to vote go vote in a primary on average across this country? We'll talk about that in 4 minutes. I'll give you the answer because that's who determines who's going to run for president. We'll talk about that in 4 minutes. My name's Westside Jeff. I'm in for Chris Krok on News Talk, 820 WBAP, and now on FM at 93.3. Name is Jeff. It's Westside Jeff sitting in for Chris Krok. I asked you a minute ago, what would you guess is the percentage of voter turnout in primaries across the United States? You got a number? I'll tell you that in about 3 minutes. First of all, though, Texas primaries are coming up here across the state, and it's time to vote. March 5th is the date that we will determine the outcome of how people in Texas vote. I find it really interesting and odd when I'm in public settings, and I remember hearing this before. Is this the best we can get, these two candidates? You're going to hear it again this whole year long. Is this the best we can get, Biden versus Trump? We've been there before. Political exhaustion. And my immediate answer to somebody that says that to me is, this the best we can get, Biden versus Trump? My immediate response to that is, did you vote in the primary? And a large percentage of people say no, and they'll give me all kinds of excuses why they didn't vote in the primary. And my answer to them then is, yes, this is the best we can get, and you're to blame. You see, when you don't vote in a primary, you are to blame. Period. You're to blame. What percentage of registered voters vote in a primary? What's the voter turnout? Across this country, the average is 27%. 27% on average across this country is the average turnout in a primary. And the primary is what determines who the candidates will be in the fall. So when you have elections and 27% of the people eligible to vote don't, or 27% of them come out and vote, you got to be kidding me. Really? Unbelievable. Unfathomable. 2020 March primary election, presidential election right here in Texas. Percentage of turnout to registered voters, 12.44%. The Democrats, 12.02 or 92. That's the turnout. You see, when you have 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 or 1 in 9 or 1 in 10 people who are registered to vote come out and vote in a primary, you deserve to have crummy candidates. You deserve to have people you don't want to vote for in the fall. That's the problem. I contend that political exhaustion is a part of the problem. You continue to hear Democrats talk about democracy, the fight for democracy. You continue to hear the Democrats talk about voter suppression. You see, I have a theory that the Democrats pushing voter suppression. The more news we have on political exhaustion, the more it makes you say, I don't want to vote. I can tell you this. I can go public on this right here, right now. So the last time I didn't vote in an election, I think was back in the 90s, maybe. You see, I take it serious. I push myself every election, even when it's an election, it doesn't matter, and all I'm voting is for school board or municipality. I do the research. I ask the questions. Not uncommon to reach out to candidates and say, hey, my name is Jeff. I got a couple questions. I'm in your district. Want to know what the difference is. And I cast a ballot. Even if I've been sick, I've gone to the polls. To think that 27% of our country doesn't vote, or only 27% of our country votes in a primary, is disgusting. And I think it comes back to political exhaustion. You see, I think our country is politically exhausted. Our country doesn't like the conversation of politics. We're tired of it. We don't want to engage in it. Go to any restaurant, sit around and look at people, listen to what other people are talking about. They ain't talking about politics. Not at all. You know what they're talking about? Today they're talking about NASCAR. Who won the Daytona 500? William Byron. Yeah, I'm a hill rat from the West Side, born and raised on the West Side up in Columbus, Ohio. I'm in a fantasy NASCAR league. I've got 6 teams in the fantasy NASCAR league. Daytona 500 was supposed to be yesterday. It was moved to today because of weather. People would rather talk about NASCAR. They'd rather talk about college basketball. They'd rather talk about the NFL draft coming up. They'd rather talk about whether Dak is going to start next year for the Cowboys. They'd rather talk about college. They'd rather talk about kids. They'd rather talk about things their kids are doing. They'd rather talk about community involvement. Rather talk about their companies they work for. They'd rather talk about veteran offensive tackle Tyron Smith, who isn't thinking of retirement. Tyron Smith wants to come back and play for the Cowboys. They'd rather talk about food. They'd rather talk about the Super Bowl. They'd rather talk about Taylor Swift and Swifties and how significant that was this year to the NFL. They'd rather talk about the Chiefs winning 2 in a row. They'd rather talk about the Chiefs going for a 3-peat. People would rather talk about a new restaurant opening around the corner. They'd rather talk about going to McDonald's and having to spend $18 on a Big Mac meal. They'd rather go talk about anything else other than politics. They'd rather talk about concerts and entertainment. That's what people talk about. They're not talking about politics. People are politically exhausted. We'll continue this conversation on the top of the hour. Sean Allen has some news coming up in about 4 minutes about South Carolina primary. New details also about 11-year-old girl missing in Polk County. And then the news story of the day today in the world of business about Capital One and Discover merging together.